The ghost town of Pinos Altos, New Mexico, lay dying under the relentless sun of August 1878, its empty streets choked with dust and abandonment, and in the crumbling remains of what had once been a boarding house, a young woman named Penelope Nash sat waiting for death to claim her as it had claimed everything else she had ever loved. Tanner Holbrook had been riding for 3 days straight when his horse started limping, forcing him to veer off the main trail toward the abandoned mining settlement he had spotted from the ridge. The gelding had picked up a stone, and Tanner needed to find shade and water before the animal went completely lame. At 26 years old, he had spent the better part of a decade drifting from one cattle drive to another, from one ranch to the next, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. His weathered face bore the marks of a man who had lived hard under an unforgiving sky, but his dark eyes still held a kindness that years of loneliness had not managed to extinguish. As he led his limping horse down what had once been the main street of Pinos Altos, he took in the desolation around him. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets in buildings that leaned precariously, their timber frames bleached gray by the sun. The silver mine that had given birth to this town had played out years ago, and the people had moved on, chasing the next promise of wealth in the unforgiving mountains of New Mexico territory. Tanner had heard about Pinos Altos from other drifters, how it had boomed in the 50s and 60s before the ore ran thin, and the Apache raids made life too dangerous for those who remained. He was searching for the old livery when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as the wind rattling through broken shutters. But something made him stop, made him tilt his head and listen with the intensity of a man who had learned to trust his instincts in dangerous country. There it was again, a rasping cough that could only come from human lungs. Tanner tied his horse to a sagging hitching post and pulled his rifle from its scabbard, not because he expected trouble, but because a man who went unprepared in this country was a man who did not live long. He followed the sound to a 2-story structure that looked ready to collapse at any moment, its front door hanging from a single hinge. The interior was dim after the blazing brightness outside, and he paused to let his eyes adjust, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. The coughing came again from upstairs, weaker this time, and Tanner climbed the creaking staircase with careful steps, testing each board before trusting it with his full weight. The hallway at the top stretched into shadows, doors opening onto empty rooms where ghosts of the past seemed to linger in the dust motes dancing through gaps in the roof. He found her in the last room at the end of the hall, curled on a bare mattress that had seen better days. Her body so thin and still he thought for a moment he had arrived too late. But then she coughed again, and her eyelids fluttered open to reveal eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and haunted, and filled with a resignation that made something tighten in Tanner's chest. She looked to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair matted with dirt and fever sweat, her face gaunt and pale beneath the grime. Her dress, once probably a respectable calico, hung on her frame like a shroud, torn and stained beyond recognition. "Leave me be," she whispered, her voice barely audible, carrying none of the fear he would have expected from a woman finding a strange man standing over her. "I have got nothing worth taking." Tanner lowered his rifle and crouched beside the mattress, his experienced eye taking in the signs of advanced dehydration and starvation. "How long have you been here?" "Does it matter?" She closed her eyes again, as if even keeping them open required more energy than she possessed. "Just go away. Let me die in peace." "I am not in the habit of letting people die when I can help them," Tanner said, his voice rough but not unkind. He set his rifle aside and reached for his canteen, uncorking it with practiced efficiency. "Can you sit up?" "Why would I want to?" But even as she spoke, her cracked lips parted slightly, her body's desperate need for water overriding her apparent wish for death. Tanner slipped his arm behind her shoulders, shocked at how light she was, how fragile her bones felt through the thin fabric of her dress. He lifted her gently, propping her against his chest, and brought the canteen to her lips. "Slow sips," he cautioned as she tried to gulp the water. "Too much too fast will make you sick." She obeyed, taking small swallows that seemed to require monumental effort, and after a few moments some of the awful grayness began to fade from her complexion. Her eyes opened again, focusing on him with more clarity, taking in his sun-darkened face, his trail-worn clothing, the weeks of beard growth that shadowed his jaw. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice slightly stronger now that moisture had touched her parched throat. "Name is Tanner Holbrook. I'm just passing through. My horse picked up a stone." He let her take another small sip before asking, "What is your name? How did you end up here?" She was silent for so long he thought she would not answer, but finally she said, "Penelope Nash. Everyone called me Penny before there was anyone left to call me anything at all." The bitterness in her voice told a story before she spoke another word, but Tanner waited patiently, still supporting her weight against his chest, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat through her back. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the ghost town with merciless intensity, but here in the shadows of the ruined boarding house, the air held a coolness that spoke of approaching evening. "My family came here 2 years ago," Penny began, her words coming slowly, as if each one had to be dragged up from a deep well of grief. "My father heard there was still silver to be found if a man knew where to look. We had nothing left in Missouri after the grasshoppers destroyed our farm, and he was desperate. My mother begged him not to bring us west, but he would not listen. He never listened." She paused to take another sip of water, and Tanner remained silent, sensing that she needed to tell this story, that it had been locked inside her for too long with no one to hear it. "We arrived in the spring of '76. There were maybe 50 people still living here then, stubborn folk who refused to admit the town was dying. My father found work in the mine with a few other men who were convinced there was a new vein just waiting to be discovered. My mother took in washing and sewing. My younger brother helped where he could, and I worked in the general store back when there still was a general store." Her voice cracked, and Tanner felt her body tense with the effort of holding back emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. He waited, offering the water again, giving her time to gather her strength. "The fever came last winter, started with the children, spread to nearly everyone in town within a month. My brother went first, then my father, then my mother. One by one, people died or fled until I was burying the last of them by myself in the spring, digging graves in ground that was still half frozen, my hands bleeding and my heart already dead in my chest." "Why did you stay?" Tanner asked gently. "Why not leave when the others did?" Penny let out a laugh that held no humor whatsoever. "Where would I go? I have no money, no family, nowhere to return to. Missouri held nothing for me even before we left. I thought about walking out into the desert, letting the heat or the animals finish me quickly, but I found I was too much of a coward for that. So I came here, to this room where I used to live when we first arrived, and I decided to simply wait. No food, no water, just waiting for my body to give up since my spirit already had." The words should have sounded dramatic, overdone, but they carried such a weight of genuine despair that Tanner felt his throat tighten. He had seen a lot of suffering in his years on the frontier, had witnessed enough death to become somewhat hardened to it, but something about this young woman's quiet resignation in the face of such complete loss touched a part of him he had thought long buried. "How long has it been since you ate?" he asked, already mentally cataloging the supplies in his saddlebags. "I do not know. A week, maybe more. I stopped keeping track of the days." Tanner carefully lowered her back onto the mattress, making sure she was comfortable before standing. "I am going to get my horse and bring him inside where there is some shade. Then I am going to see about getting some food into you. Do not try to move around while I am gone, understand?" Penny looked at him with those storm-gray eyes, confusion, and something that might have been the faintest spark of hope warring in their depths. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. I am nobody." "You are somebody who needs help," Tanner said simply. "That is enough." He left before she could argue further, descending the stairs with quick efficiency. Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that would have been beautiful if not for the desolation they illuminated. His gelding whickered softly as Tanner approached, and he spent a moment examining the horse's hoof, relieved to find that removing the stone and a few hours of rest should be enough to set things right. He led the animal into the ground floor of the boarding house, finding what had once been a dining room where he could tether it away from the sun. From his saddlebags, he retrieved the last of his jerky, a small sack of cornmeal, coffee, and a tin pot he used for cooking. It was not much, but it would have to do until he could figure out what came next. Starting a fire in the old fireplace was risky given the condition of the building, but he managed to get a small, controlled flame going. Using debris from around the room for fuel, he set water to boil in his pot, mixing in some of the cornmeal to make a thin gruel that would be easy for Penny's shrunken stomach to handle. As he worked, his mind raced with questions and concerns. What was he supposed to do with her? He could not simply ride away and leave her here to die, but bringing her with him presented its own set of complications. He had been heading south toward the Gila River country, hoping to find work on one of the big ranches that were starting to carve up the open range. A woman would slow him down, and a woman in her condition would need care and time to recover, neither of which he had in abundance. But even as these practical concerns ran through his mind, Tanner knew he had already made his decision the moment he found her lying on that mattress waiting for death. When the gruel was ready, he carried it upstairs carefully, along with his canteen refilled from his reserve water skin. Penny had not moved from where he had left her, but her eyes tracked him as he entered the room, alert and wary in a way they had not been before. That was good, he thought. It meant she was coming back to herself, that the spark of life had not completely guttered out. "I know this is not much," he said, settling beside the mattress again, "but your stomach needs something gentle after going so long without food. Can you hold the bowl, or do you need help?" Penny struggled to push herself into a sitting position, her arms shaking with the effort, and Tanner quickly set the bowl aside to help her. Once she was upright and leaning against the wall, he handed her the gruel and a spoon, watching as she stared at it with an expression he could not quite read. "I thought I had given up," she said softly. "I thought I had made peace with dying. And then you walk in here and suddenly everything is different, and I do not know what to feel about that." "Eat," Tanner said. "We can figure out the rest after you have gotten some strength back." She ate slowly, managing perhaps a third of the bowl before her stomach rebelled and she had to stop. But it was a start, and Tanner felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. He convinced her to drink more water, then settled back against the opposite wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him, his rifle within easy reach. "What happens now?" Penny asked, her hands wrapped around the bowl as if its warmth provided comfort beyond its contents. "Now you rest," Tanner said. "I will stay here tonight, make sure you're all right. In the morning, we will see about getting you on your feet." "And then what? You will ride off and leave me here, stronger but still alone?" There was no accusation in her voice, just a tired acceptance that made Tanner's jaw tighten. "No," he said, the word coming out more firmly than he had intended. "I am not leaving you here. I do not have all the answers worked out yet, but I know I am not riding away from you." Something flickered across Penny's face, an emotion too complex to name, and she looked down at the bowl in her hands. "You do not owe me anything. I am not your responsibility." "Maybe not," Tanner agreed, "but that does not change what is right. You have been dealt a cruel hand, Miss Nash, but your story does not have to end in this ghost town. If you will let me help you, I will see you somewhere safe, somewhere you can start over." "Start over," she repeated, as if testing the words, finding them strange and foreign in her mouth. "I do not even remember what that would look like." "Then we will figure it out together?" The sun set while they sat in that ruined room, darkness creeping in through the gaps in the walls and ceiling, bringing with it the cool night air that was such a blessing after the heat of the day. Tanner retrieved a blanket from his bedroll and draped it over Penny's thin shoulders, noting how she clutched it around herself with trembling fingers. He built up the small fire downstairs and made coffee, strong and bitter the way he liked it. And when he brought a cup up for Penny, she accepted it with both hands, inhaling the steam as if it carried the essence of life itself. They talked in fits and starts through the evening, Penny sharing more about her family, about the hopes that had brought them west, and the harsh reality that had destroyed those hopes. Tanner told her about his own past, about growing up on a hardscrabble farm in Texas, about losing his parents to Comanche raiders when he was 16, about the years of wandering that had followed. He had never planned to be a drifter, had never wanted the lonely life of a man with no home and no ties, but sometimes life pushed a person in directions they had not chosen, and all they could do was keep moving forward. "Do you ever think about settling down?" Penny asked as the night deepened around them. "Finding a place to call your own?" "Sometimes," Tanner admitted, "but wanting something and being able to get it are two different things. Land costs money and cattle cost money, and I have never been much good at holding on to my pay long enough to save for either. What do you spend it on, if not land or cattle?" He smiled, a quick flash of white teeth in the darkness. "Food, mostly, and replacing worn-out gear. The occasional night in a hotel when the trail has been particularly hard. I'm not a gambling man or a heavy drinker, so I have no exciting vices to confess to." "That sounds lonely," Penny said quietly. "It is," Tanner agreed, surprising himself with the admission. "I had not really let myself think about it much until now, but yes, it is lonely. You get used to it, though, or you tell yourself you do." "I know something about loneliness," Penny said, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "These past months, alone in this town with only ghosts for company, have been the loneliest of my life. But in a strange way, it was what I thought I deserved. Everyone I loved died, and I lived. That did not seem fair, so I decided to die too, to balance the scales somehow." "That is grief talking," Tanner said gently, "is not logic. You surviving when others did not is not a crime that needs punishing. It is just the random cruelty of a hard world." "Maybe," Penny said, though she did not sound convinced. "But knowing something in your head and believing it in your heart are two different things." Tanner could not argue with that, so he did not try. Instead, he settled himself more comfortably against the wall and pulled his hat down over his eyes, though he had no intention of actually sleeping. He would keep watch through the night, making sure Penny was safe, making sure she continued to breathe, making sure the fever and dehydration had not damaged her beyond recovery. It was going to be a long night, but he had endured plenty of those in his years on the trail. One more would not kill him. But as the hours passed and he listened to Penny's breathing gradually slow and deepen as she finally fell into real sleep, Tanner found his thoughts wandering down paths he had not explored in a long time. What if he did settle down? What if he used what money he had saved, meager as it was, and found a piece of land somewhere that would support a few head of cattle? What if he stopped running from the ghosts of his past and started building toward an actual future? And what about the woman sleeping a few feet away from him, this stranger who had been ready to die until he stumbled into her life? What role would she play in whatever came next? He barely knew her, had no claim on her beyond the circumstantial connection of being the one who found her, and yet he could not shake the feeling that their meeting in this ghost town was more than just random chance. Call it fate or providence or simple coincidence, but something had led him here, and something was telling him that his life had just changed in ways he did not yet understand. The night was cool and clear, the stars visible through the gaps in the ceiling like distant fires burning in an endless sky, and Tanner Holbrook sat watch over a dying woman in a dead town and wondered what morning would bring. Dawn came slowly to Pinos Altos, the sun creeping over the eastern mountains and painting the abandoned buildings in shades of rose and gold that made the desolation seem almost beautiful. Tanner had dozed off sometime in the darkest hours before dawn, but he came fully awake as light began filtering into the room, his hand instinctively moving to his rifle before he remembered where he was and why. Penny was still asleep, her breathing easier than it had been the night before, her face peaceful in a way it had not been while she was awake. Tanner watched her for a moment, noting the high cheekbones that would probably be striking when she put some weight back on, the delicate line of her jaw, the thick lashes that rested against her cheeks. She was young and should have had her whole life ahead of her, should have been courted by eager young men and given her choice of futures, not left alone to die in a ghost town because the world had taken everything she loved. He rose quietly and made his way downstairs to check on his horse and to see about breakfast. The gelding seemed in good spirits after a night of rest, and an examination of its hoof showed that the stone had not caused any lasting damage. That was good news, at least. They could travel when the time came, though Tanner was already beginning to question where exactly they would go. He made more of the thin gruel, using the last of his cornmeal, and brewed fresh coffee. His supplies were running dangerously low, and he would need to find a town soon to resupply. Silver City was perhaps 20 miles south, a rough mining camp that had grown up around the silver strikes in the area. It was not much, but it would have a general store and maybe a hotel where Penny could recover properly. The trick would be getting her there in her weakened condition. When he returned upstairs, he found Penny awake and sitting up on her own, though the effort clearly cost her. She watched him approach with those gray eyes that seemed to see more than most people's, and he noticed that some color had returned to her face overnight, a faint pink beneath the pallor that spoke of her body's determination to survive. "Good morning," he said, offering her the bowl of gruel. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over by a wagon," Penny admitted, accepting the food with trembling hands. "But better than yesterday, the water helped, and the food, little as it was." "We need to get more food into you, but we also need to move. My supplies are nearly gone, and you need proper care, a doctor if we can find one." Tanner crouched beside her, his expression serious. "There is a town called Silver City about a day's ride south of here. It is rough, but it will have what we need. Do you think you can travel?" Penny looked down at herself, at the way her hands shook just holding a bowl, at the skeletal thinness of her frame beneath the ruined dress. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I can barely sit up without feeling like I might pass out. How am I supposed to ride a horse for a day?" "You would ride with me," Tanner said. "My gelding can carry double for a day. Especially given how little you weigh right now, we would take it slow, stop frequently. But Penny, we cannot stay here. There is no food, barely any water. This town has nothing left to give." She knew he was right, could see the logic in his words even as the prospect of leaving filled her with an unexpected anxiety. This ghost town had been her prison and her refuge, the place where she had come to die. Leaving it meant accepting that she was going to live, meant facing a future she had convinced herself did not exist. That was terrifying in a way she had not anticipated. "What will happen to me in Silver City?" she asked, her voice small. "I have no money, no skills beyond working in a general store. I cannot just impose on your charity forever." "We will figure it out," Tanner said, and the confidence in his voice made her want to believe him. "First we get you healthy, then we worry about what comes next. But Penny, you need to decide if you want to live. I can get you to Silver City, can make sure you have food and shelter while you recover, but I cannot make you choose life. That has to come from you." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an invitation all at once. Penny stared at the gruel in her hands, feeling the warmth of it seep into her palms, smelling the simple, honest scent of cornmeal and water cooked together into something that could sustain life. It was not much, this meager breakfast in a ruined building in a dying town, but it represented something bigger than itself. It represented possibility, the chance to continue, to see what might lie beyond the grief that had swallowed her whole. "I want to live," she said finally, the words coming out soft but clear. "I did not think I did. But you showing up here, helping me when you had no reason to, it made me realize that maybe my story is not over yet. Maybe there is still something ahead worth seeing." Tanner felt something unknot in his chest, a tension he had not fully acknowledged until it released. "All right then, eat what you can, and then we will get you ready to travel. It is going to be hard, I will not lie about that, but we will make it. They spent the next hour preparing for the journey, which mostly consisted of Tanner gathering his meager supplies while Penny tried to work some strength back into her legs. She was wobbly as a newborn colt when she finally stood, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself to take a few steps, clinging to the wall for support. Tanner watched with a mixture of admiration and concern, ready to catch her if she fell, but letting her do as much as she could on her own. I must look ridiculous, Chadisisius, Penny said, after she had managed to walk the length of the room and back, her breathing labored from the exertion. You look like someone who is fighting to survive, Tanner replied. Nothing ridiculous about that. He had brought up his spare shirt and a pair of pants he carried for cold weather, both far too large for Penny, but cleaner and more practical than her ruined dress. He turned his back while she changed, giving her what privacy he could, and when he turned around again, he found her swimming in his clothes, the shirt hanging nearly to her knees, the pants cinched tight with rope and rolled up several times at the cuffs. She looked like a child playing dress up, and despite the seriousness of their situation, Tanner felt his lips twitch with amusement. Not a word, Penny warned, but there was the faintest hint of humor in her voice, the first he had heard from her, and that small crack in her despair felt like a victory. Getting her down the stairs was a nerve-wracking process, Tanner half carrying her when her legs gave out, both of them holding their breath as the ancient boards creaked and groaned beneath their weight. But they made it to the ground floor without incident, and Tanner lifted Penny onto his horse before swinging up behind her, settling her against his chest where he could support her weight and keep her from falling. Penny stiffened at the close contact, and Tanner felt a moment of awkwardness before necessity overrode propriety. I know this is not proper, he said quietly, but it is the only way to keep you safe on the trail. If you are uncomfortable, just say so. No, Penny said after a moment, relaxing slightly against him. No, it is all right. I trust you. Those 3 words affected Tanner more than they should have, settling into his chest with a weight that was both pleasant and unsettling. She trusted him, this woman who had every reason to distrust the world and everyone in it, and he found himself determined not to betray that trust, to prove himself worthy of the faith she was placing in him. They rode out of Pinos Altos as the sun climbed higher in the morning sky, leaving the ghost town behind them like a bad dream finally ending. Tanner kept the gelding to a walk, not wanting to jostle Penny more than necessary, and every few miles he stopped to give her water and let her rest. The trail south was rough, winding through rocky country where scrub pine and juniper clung to the hillsides, their roots digging deep into poor soil in search of water. The journey was harder than Tanner had anticipated, not because of the terrain, but because of Penny's condition. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body exhausted beyond measure, and several times he considered stopping and making camp rather than pushing on, but something in the way she roused herself each time, in the determination he saw in her eyes when they met his, told him she wanted to keep going, that stopping felt too much like giving up. They talked when Penny was awake and able, short conversations that helped pass the miles and gave Tanner insight into the woman he was trying to save. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about a mother who loved poetry and a father who loved whiskey a bit too much, about a younger brother named Samuel who had wanted to be a doctor someday. She talked about the dreams they had all carried west, the belief that a fresh start in new country could heal old wounds and create new opportunities. I think my father knew it was a mistake almost as soon as we arrived, Penny said, her voice thin and tired as the afternoon wore on, but he was too proud to admit it, too stubborn to turn back. So he kept telling us it would get better, kept promising that the next strike would be the big one, even as the town emptied out around us and the fever took hold. Was he a good man? Tanner asked, keeping his attention split between her and the trail ahead. He tried to be, Penny said after a long pause. He loved us, I think, in his way, but he was weak, and that weakness killed him in the end. Killed all of them. Not you, though. You are still here. Because I was lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. She shifted slightly in his arms, and he felt how much effort even that small movement cost her. Do you believe in fate, Tanner? That things happen for a reason? I believe in making your own luck, Tanner said, but I also believe that sometimes life puts people in your path who need help, and it is up to you whether you help them or ride on by. Maybe that is fate. Maybe it is just chance. Either way, it does not change what is right. You are a good man, Penny said softly. Better than I had any right to hope for. Tanner did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just tightened his arm slightly around her waist and urged the gelding forward. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red when Silver City finally came into view. It was not much to look at, a rough collection of buildings clustered along a creek that ran down from the mountains, but after the desolation of Pinos Altos, it looked like civilization itself. The town was busy with the evening bustle, miners coming in from their claims, women finishing their shopping before the stores closed, children running through the streets in that wild way children had when freedom beckoned. People stopped to stare as Tanner rode through with Penny cradled against him, her eyes barely open, her face pale and drawn, but he ignored them, his focus on finding the hotel he had heard about from other travelers. It stood on the main street, a 2-story wooden structure with a painted sign that read Silver Queen Hotel. Tanner dismounted carefully, keeping Penny stable before lifting her down, and she swayed on her feet, forcing him to catch her around the waist. He half carried her inside, where a middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes looked up from the front desk. "We need a room," Tanner said without preamble, "and a doctor if there is one in town. The lady is ill." The woman's expression softened as she took in Penny's condition, and she came around the desk with surprising speed. "There is a doctor just down the street. I will send my boy to fetch him. You take her up to room 4, top of the stairs on the right. Clean sheets, water in the pitcher. I will bring up some broth in a bit." "Thank you," Tanner said, gratitude rough in his voice. "We appreciate it." He carried Penny upstairs, finding the room exactly as described, small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the street. He laid her carefully on the mattress, and her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with effort. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me there." "I told you I would not," Tanner said, brushing a strand of hair back from her forehead. "Now rest. The doctor will be here soon, and we will get you properly taken care of." The doctor arrived within the hour, a young man with tired eyes and capable hands who introduced himself as Dr. William Mitchell. He examined Penny thoroughly while Tanner waited in the hallway, his hat in his hands, his nerves stretched tight with worry he had not let himself fully acknowledge until this moment. When Dr. Mitchell finally emerged, his expression was serious, but not grim. "She is severely malnourished and dehydrated, but there is no sign of fever or infection, which is good. Her body is remarkably resilient given what she has been through. With proper food, rest, and care, she should make a full recovery, though it will take time. Weeks, probably, before she's back to full strength." "Weeks," Tanner repeated, his mind already calculating how much that would cost, how long he could afford to stay in Silver City before his money ran out. "But she will recover?" "Yes, I believe so. She will need to eat small amounts frequently, nothing too heavy at first, broth, eggs, bread, gradually working up to regular food, and she needs to rest, proper rest in a real bed. Whatever happened to her, wherever she has been through hell and back." "Thank you, doctor," Tanner said, shaking the man's hand. "What do I owe you?" They settled on a price that made Tanner wince, but which he paid without complaint, and then he was alone again in the hallway trying to figure out what came next. He had enough money for maybe a week at the hotel, 2 if he was careful, and Penny did not need more medical attention. After that, he would have to find work, which meant staying in Silver City longer than he had planned. But as he stood there in the dim hallway listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night, Tanner found he did not mind the change in plans as much as he thought he would. Something about this felt right. Felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. It was a strange feeling for a man who had spent years drifting with no clear purpose, but he did not question it. He just accepted it and went back into the room to sit with Penny while she slept. The next few days established a routine of sorts. Tanner spent his mornings looking for work and his afternoons sitting with Penny, who was growing stronger by increments so small they were almost imperceptible. The hotel owner, whose name was Martha Grayson, took a motherly interest in Penny's recovery, bringing up meals and sitting with her when Tanner had to be elsewhere. The broth was replaced by soft foods, then by regular meals, and Penny's face began to fill out, the awful gauntness receding as proper nutrition did its work. Tanner found employment at a nearby ranch, working with horses for a man named Reynolds, who was building up a remuda for the fall cattle drive. The pay was decent, and Reynolds did not ask too many questions about why Tanner needed to stay close to town rather than bunking with the other ranch hands. It was hard work, but Tanner had never been afraid of hard work. And knowing that each dollar he earned meant another day of safety and recovery for Penny made even the longest days bearable. In the evenings, when his work was done and he had cleaned up at the public bathhouse, Tanner would return to the hotel and have dinner with Penny in her room. At first she was too tired for much conversation, but as her strength returned, they began to talk more, sharing stories and thoughts that slowly built a foundation of understanding between them. Tanner learned that Penny had a sharp mind and a dry wit that manifested now that she was no longer consumed by despair. She made him laugh with her observations about the people they saw from her window, and he found himself looking forward to these evenings with an eagerness that surprised him. "Tell me about Texas," Penny said one night, as they finished a dinner of roast chicken and vegetables that Martha had brought up. "You said you grew up there, but you never talk much about it." Tanner leaned back in his chair, his gaze going distant as memory pulled him back across the years. It was a different world then. This was before the war, when Texas was still rough and wild, and you could ride for days without seeing another soul. My parents had a small place near the Brazos River, just cattle and crops and hard work from sunup to sundown. I had 2 sisters, both older than me, both married and moved away before the Comanche came. "How old were you when you lost them?" Penny asked gently. 16, nearly a man, or so I thought at the time. I was out checking fence line when it happened, probably the only reason I survived. By the time I got back to the house, it was too late. I buried them the next day and left the place behind, have not been back since. "I am sorry," Penny said, and the simple sincerity in her voice made Tanner's throat tighten. "It was a long time ago," he said, though they both knew that time did not heal all wounds, just taught you how to live with them. "But it taught me that the only person you can really rely on is yourself. That is why I have been drifting all these years, never putting down roots. Cannot lose what you never have in the first place." "That sounds like a lonely way to live," Penny observed. "It is," Tanner admitted, "but it is also safe. Or at least I thought it was until I found you in that ghost town and realized that maybe safety is not the same thing as living." The words hung between them, carrying implications that neither of them was quite ready to examine. Penny looked down at her hands, twisting the napkin in her lap, her cheeks coloring slightly in the lamplight. "I have been thinking about what comes next," she said after a moment. "About what I will do when I am fully recovered. I cannot stay in this hotel room forever, and I cannot keep depending on your charity." "It is not charity," Tanner said, more sharply than he intended. "You are not a burden, Penny, and you do not need to rush into any decisions. Focus on getting well first." "But I do need to think about it," Penny insisted. "I am getting stronger every day, and soon Dr. Mitchell will say I am well enough to be on my own. I need to figure out how to support myself, how to build some kind of life here." "What if you did not have to do it alone?" The words were out of Tanner's mouth before he had fully thought them through, and he saw Penny's head snap up, her gray eyes wide with surprise. "What do you mean?" Tanner took a breath, committing to a path he had been considering for days but had not dared speak aloud. "I mean, what if we built something together? I have been thinking about what you said, about settling down, about finding a place to call my own. Reynolds has been talking about selling off some of his land, small parcels for folks who want to try ranching on a smaller scale. It is not much, maybe 100 acres or so, but it would be enough for a start. Tanner, I cannot let you do that, Penny said, shaking her head. You barely know me. You cannot upend your whole life for a stranger. You are not a stranger anymore, Tanner said quietly. These past weeks, getting to know you, helping you recover, it has meant something to me. More than I expected it to. And I'm not proposing we rush into anything improper. I'm just saying that maybe we could help each other. You need a fresh start, and I need a reason to stop running. Maybe we are what each other needs. Penny stared at him, emotions flickering across her face too quickly for him to read. You are talking about marriage, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Eventually, maybe, if that is what you wanted. But for now, I am just talking about partnership. You could keep living here, and I could start getting a place ready. We would court properly, give ourselves time to see if this is real or just circumstances pushing us together. But Penny, I feel like I found you for a reason, and I do not want to waste that by just walking away when you are well. This is crazy, Penny said, but there was no conviction in her voice. You should be looking for a young woman with a dowry, someone who can bring something to a marriage besides a history of loss and poverty. I do not care about dowries or what you do not have, Tanner said, leaning forward, his dark eyes intense. I care about who you are, about the strength you showed surviving when anyone else would have given up, about the way you make me think that maybe there is more to life than just drifting from one place to another. If that is crazy, then I am willing to be crazy. Tears welled up in Penny's eyes, spilling over to track down her cheeks, and she made no move to wipe them away. You really mean this. You are not just being kind. I am not that kind, Tanner said, a hint of humor warming his voice. I am offering this because I want to, because I think we could make a good team, you and I, but I will not push. If you need time to think about it, take all the time you need. Just know that the offer is real. Penny reached across the small table between them, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it over his. I do not need time, she said, her voice thick with emotion. These past weeks you have given me back my life. More than that, you have given me hope that the future might hold something worth living for. If you are willing to take a chance on me, then I am willing to take a chance on us. Tanner felt something shift in his chest, like a door he had kept closed for years suddenly swinging open to let in light. He turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers, feeling the delicate bones, the warmth of her skin, the slight calluses that spoke of work and hardship. This was real, he realized. This connection between them was not just convenience or pity or circumstance. It was the beginning of something that could grow into something lasting if they were brave enough to nurture it. Then we will do this right, he said. I will talk to Reynolds tomorrow about that land. And I will start building us a house, nothing fancy at first, but solid and warm. Meanwhile, you will stay here and continue to recover and let me court you the way you deserve to be courted. I have never been courted before, Penny admitted, with a small, watery smile. I do not even know what that looks like. Neither do I, Tanner confessed. But I figure we will work it out as we go. That seems to be how we do things anyway. They sat there in the lamplight, hands joined across the table, two damaged souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and decided to take a chance on hope. Outside, Silver City went about its noisy, chaotic business, unaware and uncaring of the quiet miracle unfolding in room 4 of the Silver Queen Hotel. But Tanner and Penny were aware, were caring, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were busy ones for both of them. Tanner negotiated with Reynolds and managed to secure 120 acres of decent grassland with a creek running through it. Paying for it with the money he had saved over his years of drifting plus a loan he would work off over the next 2 years. It was not a perfect piece of land, but it was his, and that made all the difference. He threw himself into building a cabin, working every spare moment he had to raise walls and roof, a structure that would keep them safe through the coming winter. Other ranch hands helped when they could, And slowly the cabin took shape. One room for now with a loft overhead, but built solid with plans for expansion later. Tanner had never built a house before, but he learned as he went, accepting advice from men who had done it and figuring out the rest through trial and error. Meanwhile, Penny continued to recover, growing stronger each day until Dr. Mitchell finally declared her well enough to start moving around town. Martha helped her find work at the general store, the owner needing someone who could read and write and keep accounts. The pay was modest, but it gave Penny a sense of independence and purpose that was crucial to her recovery. She insisted on paying Tanner back for the hotel room and meals, and though he protested, she was adamant, her pride demanding that she contribute where she could. Their courtship was unconventional by any standard, but it suited them. Tanner would come to town after work, cleaned up and presentable, and they would walk together through Silver City streets, talking about their days and their plans for the future. On Sundays when Tanner did not work, they would picnic by the creek that ran through his land, Penny bringing food she had prepared and Tanner showing her the progress on the cabin. "It is going to be beautiful," Penny said one October afternoon as they sat on a blanket near the half-finished cabin, the autumn sun warm on their faces. "You have done so much already." "It is coming along," Tanner agreed, studying the structure with a critical eye. "Should have the roof finished before the first snow, and the walls chinked tight enough to keep the cold out. It will not be fancy, but it will be ours." "Ours," Penny repeated, tasting the word. "I like how that sounds." "So do I," Tanner said, reaching over to take her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. "I have been thinking, Penny. I know we said we would take our time, let things develop naturally, but I'm finding that I do not want to wait much longer. I want to marry you. Not because I feel obligated or because it is convenient, but because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, the first time either of them had spoken of love directly, though it had been growing between them for weeks. Penny turned to look at him fully, her gray eyes bright with emotion. "You love me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I do," Tanner said simply. "I think I started loving you that first day in Pinos Altos, when you told me to leave you be and I knew I never would. You are the bravest, strongest person I have ever met, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. So yes, I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Penny laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed to bubble up from deep inside her. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily now that the door had been opened. "I think I have loved you since the moment you gave me water and told me my story was not over. You saved my life, Tanner. But more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live it. Of course I will marry you." Tanner pulled her into his arms, and they kissed there beside the creek, a slow, sweet kiss that sealed the promise they were making to each other. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling, their faces flushed with happiness and anticipation. "When?" Penny asked. "When do you want to get married?" "As soon as the cabin is finished," Tanner said. "Another few weeks, maybe a month at most. We will have a simple ceremony, nothing fancy. Just us and whoever wants to witness it." "That sounds perfect," Penny said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Everything about this sounds perfect." They were married on a crisp November day with the first hints of winter in the air. The ceremony taking place in front of the newly completed cabin with Dr. Mitchell and Martha Grayson serving as witnesses. Penny wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Tanner wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. The local circuit preacher performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Tanner kissed his bride with a tenderness that made Martha dab at her eyes with her handkerchief. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, with a few friends from town bringing food and drink to share. As the sun set and their guests began to depart, Tanner and Penny finally found themselves alone, standing in front of their cabin, the door open and inviting, the interior warm with the fire Tanner had built earlier. "Are you ready?" Tanner asked, and Penny knew he was not just asking about entering the cabin, but about everything that came with marriage, the intimacy and partnership and joining of lives. "I am ready," Penny said, taking his hand. "I am not afraid, not anymore." Tanner lifted her in his arms, carrying her over the threshold in the traditional way, and Penny laughed, the sound echoing through the small space that was now their home. He set her down gently, and they stood together in the firelight, husband and wife, two people who had found each other when they needed it most and chosen to build a life together from the ashes of their pasts. That night, as they lay together in the bed Tanner had built with his own hands, Penny traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips, marveling at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not found me?" she asked softly. "No," Tanner said, pulling her closer. "I do not let myself think about that because it did not happen. I did find you, and you chose to live, and now here we are. That is all that matters." "Here we are," Penny agreed, resting her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "The luckiest two people alive." The first winter in their cabin was hard, but not unbearable, with Tanner working when the weather allowed, and Penny keeping their home warm and welcoming. They learned to read each other's moods and needs, to work together in the easy partnership they had hoped for, to laugh at their mistakes and celebrate their successes. Money was tight, but they had enough, and the love between them seemed to make up for everything they lacked in material wealth. Spring came with a rush of green across the land, and Tanner acquired his first small herd of cattle, 10 head that represented everything he could afford, but which were a start toward building a proper ranch. Penny planted a garden behind the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil, and together they worked to turn their 120 acres into something productive and sustainable. In late summer of that first year of marriage, Penny realized she was pregnant, and the news filled them both with a joy tempered by nervousness. They were still young, still figuring things out, and the prospect of a child brought home just how much responsibility they had taken on. But as Penny's belly grew and Tanner felt the first kicks of life beneath his palm, his fears gave way to wonder and anticipation. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1880, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Tanner had ridden through a snowstorm to fetch Dr. Mitchell, and the young physician had arrived just in time to help bring the baby into the world. They named him Samuel, after Penny's lost brother, and when Tanner held his son for the first time, he felt his throat tighten with emotion he could barely contain. "He is perfect," Penny said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He looks just like you." "He has your eyes," Tanner countered, though the baby's eyes were still the cloudy blue of all newborns. "And I hope he has your strength. He is going to need it growing up out here." "He will have both of us," Penny said. "That is all any child really needs. Love and parents who are there for them." As Tanner sat beside the bed, cradling his son while his wife rested, he thought back to that day in Pinos Altos when he had found a dying woman in a ghost town and made the impulsive decision to help her. So much had changed since then. So much had grown from that single choice. He had gone from a drifting cowboy with no ties and no future to a husband and father with land of his own and a family to protect and provide for. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The years that followed were full ones, marked by hard work and steady growth. Tanner's herd increased slowly but steadily, and he hired on occasional help during busy seasons, building a reputation as a fair man and a competent rancher. Penny expanded her garden and started raising chickens, selling eggs in town to bring in extra money. Their cabin gained an addition, then another, growing with their needs and their family. Samuel was joined by a daughter named Rose when he was 3, then another son named James 2 years after that. The cabin that had once seemed spacious for two now rang with the noise and chaos of children. And Tanner and Penny would sometimes look at each other across the dinner table, surrounded by their offspring, and marvel at how full their lives had become. The children grew up healthy and strong, learning early to help with chores and understanding that their comfortable life came through hard work and sacrifice. Samuel showed an aptitude for working with horses, spending hours with his father learning to train and gentle the remuda. Rose had her mother's sharp mind and helped keep the household accounts, her neat handwriting filling the ledgers Penny maintained. James was still young, but he showed signs of having inherited his father's quiet determination and his mother's stubborn will. As the 1880s progressed, Silver City grew and evolved, becoming less rough and more civilized with each passing year. New businesses opened, families moved in, and the wild edge that had characterized the town when Tanner and Penny first arrived gradually softened. They watched these changes with mixed feelings, part of them nostalgic for the rawness of those early years, part of them grateful for the stability and opportunities the growth brought their children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tanner surprised Penny with a trip back to Pinos Altos. They left the children with Martha, who had become like a grandmother to them, and rode north through country that had become familiar and beloved over the years. Penny was hesitant at first, unsure if she wanted to revisit the place where she had nearly died, but Tanner convinced her that facing that past might bring a sense of closure she had not realized she needed. The ghost town was even more desolate than before, if that was possible. The buildings had collapsed further under the weight of time and weather, and the streets were choked with brush and tumbleweeds. They found the boarding house where Tanner had discovered Penny, or what remained of it, the roof mostly caved in now, the walls leaning at dangerous angles. Penny stood looking at the ruins for a long moment before speaking. "It seems smaller than I remember, less frightening somehow." "That is because you are not that person anymore," Tanner said, standing beside her, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "The woman who waited here to die is gone. You are someone different now, someone who chose life and made something beautiful from it." "We made something beautiful," Penny corrected, turning to look at him. "I could not have done any of this without you. You saved me, Tanner. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Tanner said, pulling her into his arms. "I was just drifting before I found you, existing but not really living. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to put down roots and build something lasting. So if there is any saving to credit, it goes both ways." They stood there in the ruins of Pinos Altos, holding each other as the sun climbed higher in the sky, two people who had survived their pasts and built a future together through determination, love, and sheer stubborn will. When they finally left, riding back towards Silver City and the life they had created, neither of them looked back. There was no need. The past had released its hold on them, and the future stretched ahead full of promise and possibility. The children grew and eventually began making their own ways in the world. Samuel, at 18, started working as a horse trainer for one of the larger ranches, earning a reputation for his skill and patience. Rose, at 15, caught the eye of the school teacher's son, a serious young man named David who treated her with respect and kindness. James, at 13, was already taller than his mother and showing signs of inheriting his father's broad shoulders and steady temperament. Tanner and Penny, now in their 40s, looked at the life they had built with satisfaction and gratitude. The ranch, while never large, was profitable and well regarded. Their marriage, tested by years of hardship and challenge, had only grown stronger with time. They still made time for each other, still walked together in the evenings when the work was done, still talked about their dreams and hopes for the future. "Do you ever regret it?" Penny asked one evening as they sat on the porch they had added to the front of the house, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for nearly 20 years. "Stopping that day in Pinos Altos? Tying yourself to a dying woman with nothing to offer?" "Not for a single moment," Tanner said, reaching over to take her hand, the gesture as familiar and comfortable as it had been that first time by the creek. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me everything I did not even know I was missing. A home, a family, a purpose, a reason to stop running and start living. How could I ever regret that?" "I just want to make sure," Penny said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I was that day. What were the chances that a good man would ride into that ghost town exactly when I needed him most?" "I do not know about chance," Tanner said, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe it was fate, or providence, or just blind luck. But I am grateful for it every day. I am grateful I listened to that instinct that told me to check the buildings. I am grateful you chose to live instead of giving up. I am grateful for every moment we have had together and every moment still to come." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The years had been hard, filled with challenges and setbacks and moments of doubt, but they had faced everything together, their love providing strength and foundation for everything else. In the years that followed, they watched their children marry and start families of their own. Samuel wed a rancher's daughter and started his own horse breeding operation, building his business with the same determination his father had shown. Rose married David, the school teacher's son, and they moved to Santa Fe, where he took a position at a prestigious school. James, true to his nature, stayed close to home, taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Tanner began to slow down with age. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and laughter on holidays and visits, and Tanner and Penny embraced their new roles with joy. They told their grandchildren stories about the old days, about what Silver City had been like when it was rough and wild, about the hard work it had taken to build the ranch from nothing. But they never told them about Pinos Altos, about how close Penny had come to death in that ghost town. Some stories were too personal, too painful, even with the passage of time. As they entered their 60s, Tanner's body began to show the effects of decades of hard labor. His joints ached in the mornings, and he moved with less of the easy grace that had characterized his younger years. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Penny never wavered. She, too, showed the marks of time, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with the evidence of years of sun and wind and hard living. But to Tanner, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her in that boarding house. Perhaps more so because now her beauty was enhanced by everything they had shared and survived together. They celebrated their 30th anniversary with all 3 children and 7 grandchildren present, a gathering that filled every corner of the expanded house and spilled out into the yard. As Tanner looked around at the family he and Penny had created, at the love and laughter that filled the air, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. "What are you thinking?" Penny asked, coming to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his with the ease of 3 decades of practice. "I'm thinking about that day in Pinos Altos," Tanner said honestly, "about how different everything would have been if I'd just ridden past, if I'd not stopped to investigate that sound. All of this, everyone here, none of it would exist." "But you did stop," Penny said, squeezing his hand. "You saved me, and together we created all of this. That is what matters. Not what might have been, but what is." "You are right," Tanner agreed, pulling her close. "You are always right." "Not always," Penny said with a smile, "but often enough that you should listen to me more." They laughed together, the sound mingling with the noise of their family, and Tanner felt a contentment so deep and complete it was almost overwhelming. This was what life was supposed to be about, he thought. Not wealth or fame or grand adventures, but this: love and family, and the quiet satisfaction of building something lasting with your own 2 hands. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost Martha to old age, mourning the woman who had been such a steady presence in their lives. They celebrated as each grandchild reached significant milestones, graduations and weddings, and the births of great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to operate, now run primarily by James, with help from Samuel's oldest son, a young man who had inherited the family's love of the land. Tanner and Penny, now in their early 70s, had settled into a quieter life, their days filled with small pleasures and simple routines. They still walked together every evening when the weather allowed, still talked about everything and nothing, still found comfort and joy in each other's presence. Their love had evolved over the decades, becoming something deeper and more fundamental than passion or romance. It was the bedrock upon which their entire lives had been built, unshakable and enduring. On a warm spring evening in 1908, as they sat on their porch watching yet another sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Penny turned to Tanner with a serious expression. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, in the boarding house?" "I said a lot of things," Tanner replied, though he knew exactly what she meant. "You said I was somebody who needed help, and that was enough," Penny reminded him. "That simple statement changed everything for me. It gave me permission to accept help, to stop seeing myself as beyond saving. I have never forgotten it." "I am glad," Tanner said softly, "though I think you saved yourself as much as I saved you. You made the choice to live. I just gave you the opportunity." "We saved each other," Penny said, echoing words he had spoken decades earlier in Pinos Altos. "And we built a good life together, a life worth living." "The best life," Tanner agreed, reaching for her hand. "I would not change a single moment of it." They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and created light together. Their bodies were old now, marked by time and hardship, but their spirits remained young, still capable of joy and wonder and deep, abiding love. As the years advanced further, their children and grandchildren began to worry about them living alone on the ranch, but Tanner and Penny resisted all suggestions to move to town or to live with family. This land was theirs, earned through sweat and sacrifice, and they intended to remain on it for as long as they were able. James and his wife built a small house nearby so they could check in daily, and that compromise satisfied everyone. Tanner passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1912. 3 months shy of his 84th birthday, Penny woke to find him gone, his hand still holding hers as it had for more than 30 years of marriage. She grieved deeply, but without bitterness, grateful for the time they had had rather than resentful of what had been taken. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Silver City, testament to the respect and affection Tanner had earned over his decades in the community. He was buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch, the spot he had always said had the best view of the sunrise. Penny stood at his grave surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a family that had sprung from two damaged people who chose to heal together. "He gave me everything," Penny said to Samuel after the service, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I was waiting to die in a ghost town, and he gave me a reason to live. He gave me all of this." "You gave him just as much, Mother," Samuel said, putting his arm around her. "You gave him a home and a family when he had been drifting alone for years. It was not one-sided. You saved each other." Penny lived for 3 more years after Tanner's death, spending her time with family and tending the small garden she still maintained behind the house. She told stories about the early days to anyone who would listen, keeping Tanner's memory alive through her words. She never remarried, never even considered it, content to spend her remaining years with her memories and her family. When Penny passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1915, she was buried beside Tanner on that hillside, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their 2 short lives. But those who knew their story understood that the true monument to their love was not stone markers, but the thriving family they had created, the ranch they had built from nothing, and the example they had set of what it meant to choose love and life even in the face of overwhelming despair. The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down through the line with stories of Tanner and Penny becoming part of family lore. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren grew up hearing about the cowboy who found a dying woman in a ghost town and chose to save her, about the woman who chose to live when death seemed easier, about the love that grew between 2 damaged souls and became strong enough to sustain an entire dynasty. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the New Mexico landscape in shades of gold and crimson, family members swore they could feel the presence of Tanner and Penny still lingering on that land they had loved so much, their spirits intertwined as their lives had been, forever watching over the legacy they had created from hope, determination, and love that refused to surrender to circumstances. The ghost town of Pinos Altos slowly crumbled into dust, its brief moment of importance fading into history, remembered only by a few. But the choice made in that dying town, the decision of a drifting cowboy to stop and help a desperate woman, echoed forward through time in ways neither of them could have imagined. Every child born to their descendants, every success achieved, every moment of happiness experienced, all of it traced back to that single afternoon when Tanner Holbrook heard a cough in an abandoned building and chose to investigate. Love, it turned out, was not just about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about showing up when you had no obligation to, about choosing to help when walking away would be easier, about building something together one day at a time with patience and dedication. It was about seeing potential in someone who had given up on themselves, about offering hope when despair seemed the only option, about refusing to accept that some situations were beyond saving. Tanner and Penny's story was not unique in the broad strokes. Plenty of people had met under difficult circumstances, had fallen in love despite the odds, had built lives together in the challenging environment of the frontier, but their story was unique to them. Personal and profound and transformative in ways that could not be quantified or compared. They had saved each other, not through any single dramatic act, but through thousands of small choices made over decades, through commitment that endured when passion faded, through partnership that strengthened rather than weakened under pressure. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.